Hi, my name is Eric Hanchin. I'm a developer advocate for AWS Amplify. Today, I'm going to show you how to connect to Amazon Bedrock using AWS Amplify Gen 2. Amplify Gen 2 is the code-first developer experience for building full-stack apps on AWS services. It's made specifically for front-end and full-stack devs. Let's jump in and take a look. So let's begin by looking at this application. Now, at any time you want to look at the source code, a link to the GitHub repository will be in the description. So on the first page, it'll make me either sign in or create an account. I already have an account, so I'm just going to go and click sign in. So on this page here is the default room view. I can actually add in additional rooms if I like, and I can choose which room I want to be in by choosing this dropdown. So let's add one called Eric. So now I'm in a room called Eric. I can also change the cursor if I like. Now what can happen here is if I had this up and running and I had multiple users, each user can log into their account and they would have their own specific cursor. So you can have multiple cursors showing up here at the same time, multiple users, and you can kind of get the idea of like a multiplayer effect here. Another thing we can do is we can click add picture. So let's say we want to add a picture. I'm going to add in this adorable picture of a cat. And what this is doing is it's uploading the picture to S3. And then it's displaying it here, and it's all using our Amplify Gen 2 storage category to do this. And I can certainly clear the files, but one really nice thing is I can click this generate haiku. This uses Anthropic's Claude Haiku, and then it analyzes the picture and then gives us a haiku. So in this case, curious kittens gaze, captivated by the bloom, nature's simple grace. So I can upload multiple pictures here. I can use Amazon Bedrock with Claude 3 haiku to make haikus, which is really interesting. And then I can also delete everything by clicking clear files, and that will clear everything for me. So now that we have an idea of how this application looks and works, let's take a look at the code and see how this is all put together. I have downloaded the GitHub repository. I cloned it down locally onto my system here. It's called Amplify Social Room. And then I ran in npm install, and you can see here I have my node modules. Now, one thing you may notice is it has this Amplify folder, and this Amplify folder has all the configurations for Amplify and all basically the infrastructure that we're creating for this app. If you are brand new to AWS, I'd highly recommend to go to docs.amplify.aws. You can click on this configure AWS for local development. And what this does is it sets up the IAM Identity Center, which allows you to set up the local credentials on your computer so you can test locally. And I did that before this video started. So one thing I can do is with all this infrastructure in this repository, this auth, data, functions, and storage, I can now just run one command and create an ephemeral environment so I can test locally. And then at any time, if I feel like this is good, I can actually push it up to the AWS console. So, but to start off with, I'm gonna run npx ampx sandbox. And this is going to create this ephemeral environment, and it's gonna look at this Amplify folder and add in all these resources. And you can see here that it added in all these resources. I'm going to stop, and I can stop this at any time, and it will destroy these resources when I'm done. And if I run the npm run dev, I can then run this application locally. I would highly recommend if you are brand new, and on top of setting up the Identity Center, we have quick start guides for React, Next.js, Angular, Vue, JavaScript, React Native. Follow the quick start guide, and that will get you up and running quickly. And also, if you could check out the manual installation guide if you have an existing repository and you want to get Gen 2 up and running. But let's take a look a little bit of how this is made. If I look at this Amplify folder, I have this auth, data, functions, and storage. So if we begin to look at auth, so with just these lines of code, it creates a user pool and sets up Cognito for you. And it says right here, this will be using email as our default login. You noticed earlier in the demo that I used email to log in. And there's a whole bunch of configuration I can do here. Now, if you look inside this resource.ts file in the data folder, this defines our data schema. So these are all the things we're going to be saving in a database, but also how we're going to connect to Amazon Bedrock and our Claude 3 Haiku large language model. One thing to keep in mind is we're doing a couple of different ways of handling that here. We have this a.model for this picture, and what that does, this is all backed by AppSync, our managed GraphQL service. So a.model will create all the resolvers to create, read, update, delete, and list for you. And then we have these different fields called path, room ID, and room. And we can also set what they are. In this case, it's a string, it's required. If you've used other validation libraries, this may look familiar to you. We also have this publish cursor, which is a custom mutation that you can create. We also can add authorization rules. And this is going to something called publish cursor. And if we look inside here, it's not much to look at, but this is using a JavaScript resolver to do everything. And you can configure this the way you like. One thing interesting here is we're also using this generate haiku. So this is using a Lambda resolver. And it looks a little different. So if we look inside here and look inside our functions, we have this resource and handler file. And this file right here connects directly to our Amazon Bedrock service and uses that model for the haiku model. And you can see here we're actually grabbing the data out of our S3 storage, and we're then invoking the model and passing that data in as a base64 image into it. Now you're probably thinking, how do you set up the storage and how do you make sure you have the right access for everything? Well, we have a few ways to do that. One is in storage here. You can see I have, with these lines of code, this will create our S3 storage for us. It'll create this new room. It'll have different access rules. So authenticated users can get, write, and delete, but only guests can get. And then it allows resource generate haiku to read. So just by using this one line right here to this generate haiku or allow resource for generate haiku, our Lambda function now will have access to the S3 bucket, and we can then access it and do gets and reads from it, which is exactly what we needed to be able to send it to our Amazon Bedrock service. And you can also define your configuration for your Lambda resolver. So you can even just create just normal Lambda functions and use function URLs if you want. You can connect it to triggers is a pretty common way. So let's say when a user logs in, you can do a cognito trigger that would then call a Lambda function, or when an upload completes, you can do that as well. We have a lot of functionality there. If you look at our backend TS file, this is where we take all those resources, that auth data storage and the functions, and then we define it. And you can see here, we can even drop down to the CDK layer. So Amplify Gen 2 is created on top of CDK, and at any time you can drop down to the lower layers. In this case, we're setting up a life cycle configuration to put the expiration date as 1. And then we can set individual IAM policies on here. In this case, we're adding this role policy to invoke model to allow the Lambda function to be able to talk to Amazon Bedrock. One thing, if you're following along, you actually need to go into the AWS console for Amazon Bedrock and enable this model for it to work. Just keep that in mind if you are trying to follow along and test this out yourself. And that should be pretty straightforward. You just need to go into the region, just search for Amazon Bedrock in the console, and then it'll have something called model access, which allows you to turn on or off models. Now, all 4 of these folders here create the infrastructure for you. But you may notice if you go in data right here and go to the resources, we have this export schema. And what this does is it allows the front end to have access to all these schemas, so that way you can use our API and our JavaScript library to be able to talk to it. And let me give you just a little hint of how that works. If you go into our source folder, now this is a Next.js application as well. We support all the major frameworks out there. If you go to app.tsx, you can see here we have a few different components. Let's take a look at the picture manager. This is what does the uploading of the S3 bucket. And you can see right here we have this client.models.picture.observe query. And what this does is that anytime an event occurs for this model picture, it will then trigger, and then it will update for you. So every time we do an update to our pictures, this will get updated, and the pictures will just be displayed, and it sets the set picture. You can also notice here I can do client dot, And then I have full TypeScript. It's fully type aware, so I can do GraphQL or I can do models. And what's really nice here is I can do my picture room model that I created earlier, and then I can do my create, delete, get, lists, observe queries, anything we want. And so I don't have to write raw GraphQL queries in here. I can just use one of those create, read, update, or deletes. And the way this works, this client is passing in this schema. And the schema came directly from that resource TS file we saw earlier. And we have the same thing for haikus. So anytime an event occurs, this haiku will set this set haiku use state value. We also have something for fetch URLs, another use effect. So as soon as anytime the pictures changes, we grab the pictures and display them. And then this is just essentially React code. You may see something called Flex here in heading. We have a whole UI components library that you can use to do all sorts of things, including it's basically a whole UI components library that has buttons and flexes and things like that. So we use that in here to give an idea of how that would work. And we have an input. And so this is how you do the uploading. Let's take a look at the cursor panel real quick. The cursor panel also uses subscriptions. And so anytime some events occur, you get updates. And this is how we are able to have multiple users on the page and have the cursor being displayed correctly. And you can take a look at this code in more detail if you like. And finally, the last thing I want to show you is the control panel. And the control panel is the room selector, which handles the different rooms. And once again, we use the same sort of pattern with this observe query. So when events change, we update the rooms. And this is where you can select the room or create new rooms. So I really think if you're trying to learn AWS Amplify Gen 2, this is a great app to look over and to use. Let me know in the comments below what you guys have learned. Thanks.